This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and we're coming off a tremendous battle, which has gotten publicity throughout the United States and internationally at the Bessemer, Alabama Amazon warehouse. And although Amazon is owned by a multi-billionaire with $182 billion, Jeff Bezos spent millions and millions of dollars fighting the union and intimidating the workers. And although it has been defeated, there are very important lessons to learn from the struggle at Amazon on what the workers faced, and also how workers are going to get organized at Amazon, Walmart, and the large number of non-union employers. And joining us is Mike Elk, and he is with Payday. He's a senior editor, and he's been covering it. He had a crew in Bessemer looking at what was going on, and has written a report about the lessons of it. So welcome to our program, Mike.
Good to be on the show program, Steve.
So Mike, why don't you talk about your experience there? And also you've covered many other organizing campaigns in the South at Nissan and a number of other places. And why don't you talk about the lessons learned and unlearned about what happened at Bessemer?
Well, I think, I covered I've had the unfortunate dubious distinction of covering the last 5 major losing union elections in the South. I was there in Chattanooga in 2014 when the UAW lost at Volkswagen by a couple dozen votes. I was there at Canton and Nissan in 2017 when they lost almost 2-1, not quite as bad as they lost in Amazon. And then I was there again. I was there at Boeing and Charleston where machinists lost nearly 2-1, and then I was back in Chattanooga where they lost nearly 2-1. Those UAW campaigns were heavily criticized in a lot of ways, and there were lots of flaws to them. But they did actually try to really build something on the shop floor. They spent years trying to build a committee, and this was a much smaller factory. And auto factories don't have nearly the kind of turnover rate that an Amazon factory does, that an Amazon warehouse does. And so folks had spent years trying in those places, and they got with only a few dozen votes. What happened here was it was a new warehouse. It was expanding. The people thought, oh, well, maybe we can just get a quickie election with just, 2,000 folks here. We have a head of steam here. We have some cards. We're going to turn it in. But then they dramatically expanded the size of the bargaining unit. They added on more hirers as the plant expanded. And they never built a strong organizing committee. And they decided to go ahead with the vote, which I don't think is necessarily a good move at that point. For many reasons. But I digress. They argued in a Huffington Post interview, where the lead organizer argued that you can never really do the kind of deep organizing you really need to do in those kind of facilities in a place like Amazon, given how high the turnover rate is. But as we know, these things where union organizers always think, oh, there's all this outrage, there's COVID, there's all this outrage, we're going to push something through quickly. You can sometimes push a wildcat strike through quickly. That's a hot shop activity. You can push through other kind of non-union activities. But to make people make that fatal jump towards the union, I don't know how that union really, it's going to be very tough for that union to try to go back in there now, having lost so badly, and not having a real organization to leave behind.
And when you went to visit it, you tried to talk to some of the workers. What did you find out about the ability of reporters to talk to workers at the factory, at the warehouse, and how they were handling that?
Well, it was ironic because both the corporation and the union limited access to workers during this. One of the grand ironies, right? Both of them did. The union only ever put out 2 workers to speak, Jennifer Bates and Daryl Richardson, and then they put out an organizer, Big Mike, who's from another shop. They kept this very tightly controlled, and you could tell that was problematic. It didn't seem like they had a lot of strength. We were there at a rally, Bernie Sanders, just a few days before the end of the election period. And there were fewer than barely a dozen workers there from the organizing committee. Out of a 6,000 person plant, that's not a sign of strength. And so I think, these folks thought, okay, well, a lot of people are really upset over COVID. We'll get this through now. But, people, these corporations, they're very sophisticated. Often we depict these anti-union meetings as just being threats of closing, but the threat of closing is always in the background. What they're doing more up front is they're saying, hey, we're going to change everything different. They're literally going around handing out candy. They're asking people in because in these one-on-one anti-union meetings, they're just not giving people the anti-union spiel. They're also giving them attention, saying, hey, you can talk to me about your work problems. Like we get it. People are upset. We listen, it shakes things up. We brought in these young black managers, we're going to be nice to everybody now all of a sudden, no more yelling at people. And, and then the back of the mind, they're also hinting at the threat. If you don't do this, it could get a lot worse. So a lot of folks having very little knowledge of unions voted against it. And, our interviews with folks in the parking lot, we were talking to a woman, she said, no, it's not that I necessarily have anything against unions. It's just I got something going good here. And I don't know, I don't want a union to come in and screw it up. And this was a woman who had been working at fast food. And then she came out there and was making $16 an hour plus health insurance, plus some community college assistance. For, low skill job like warehouse work, that's not bad money. It's below what it should be. And it's actually below the average. But for that area, for folks coming out of that kind of industry, it's not necessarily bad money. And it's an easy job to get. If you can show up, you can do the work, they'll hire you. And there's a real culture of ableism that develops because, what they wind up doing in an anti-union campaign is they paint the people that are pro-union as they're the disabled folks, they're the lollygaggers. And, that doesn't really, it creates a sense of team pride that we're the folks that can do the jobs. We can do the tough jobs. We're the tough folks. We're able to do it. There becomes this sense of team pride. And then to booster this team pride, they had managers go around and hand out on people's lanyards like little buttons to say vote no all over them, like the little Amazon symbols, vote no, vote no. And so folks did that, folks willfully did that, and, folks are just thinking, hey, I got a good job, this is paying twice what I was making elsewhere. Don't want to screw this up.
And Amazon and Bezos have been accused of covering up health and safety violations. They've also gotten rid of workers who get injured illegally, which is a workers' comp fraud, actually, to get rid of workers. They really haven't been prosecuted anywhere in the country for workers' comp fraud, for really conspiring to violate laws. And that doesn't seem to have changed under the Biden administration. You think they're getting off scot-free as far as their violation of laws?
I can't quite tell yet. It's still early. We'll see what the Biden administration does. So far, the Biden administration hasn't put out any comment on this, which I found interesting. So we'll see where that goes. But I think it's certainly something we should watch because, the Biden administration, while they did record a pro-union video, it did come pretty late in the ball game. So, we'll see where it goes.
And maybe you can talk about how the unions organized in the 30s, because the AFL-CIO is saying they're going to try to pass this PRO Act, which is unlikely to get through the Senate because of the filibuster. So we're not going to have any big labor law change, yet they're not involved in organizing mass protests, for example. There were rallies around the country through the Southern Workers Assembly, which you referred to in your article, 50 demonstrations around the country, not a word from the AFL-CIO to urge the labor councils and other unions to support it. You think it's necessary to build a workers' movement, really, to have successful organizing at companies like Amazon, Walmart, and others?
No, I don't think you need to target these huge shops. You have to really start at the bottom and start building worker organizations in places where you can build worker organization and where people want to build. The labor movement doesn't start with labor leaders. It starts with rank and file leaders, right? And so in this kind of facility, they really try to get rich quick scheme here, the organizers. If they had taken a multi-year approach and targeted Amazon nationwide with a nationwide movement, created a sense of movement, and then moved to a union vote, I think it'd be different. And even if they lost narrowly, but when you lose, 75 to 25, it's really bad. This is worse than the Canton, Mississippi loss. That was about 62-37, right? And, that was bad, but at least, those folks had fought, they built some sort of organization. They still have some sort of organization and they're still trying. So I think you really have to rethink the way you think of unions and get back to that. Because people, they talk about the National Labor Relations Act leading to all these unions in the 30s, but there had been a decade, 2 decades of organizing prior to that. In most of those places like GE and General Motors, there had been non-traditional, or not, I don't even want to use the word non-traditional because they've been around forever. There've been worker-led organizations that weren't necessarily unions.
Class struggle unionism, is that?
Yeah, there was real unions that really did things, and even if they didn't have a majority, you still have that in some workplaces. And I think that's what we have to really get back to.
And the fight in the unions for democracy, how does democracy play a role in union organizing? Because, for example, the Teamsters, the UFCW, which are going to be radically affected because Amazon now, its global presence and presence in the United States is going to be like Walmart in the rural areas. In the urban areas, Amazon could destroy large numbers of small businesses and be a real competitive threat to UPS, which is Teamsters. I mean, it doesn't seem there's any urgency on the part of UFCW and the Teamsters and other unions to really get behind a national campaign against them and an education campaign about labor.
No, and I think there's been a real, they get into these parochial struggles, they get into these contract struggles, and they cut off so much of their energy because they're very much run like technocrats. It's very top down. It's very, what can I do as a union rep? Let's not get the members too riled up. If we can show up a handful of members for protests. And so you go to these union protests like you and I have been to, where it'll be, a local with several thousand members, and there'll be maybe a few dozen of the members there if they're lucky, right? We've been to those protests a million times, right? And so I think, union democracy is really the key to unlocking these things, because if we had democratic organizing committees, if we had folks that had a multi-year vision, that if we had folks that were out of the service model and into the understanding how they are as organizers, I think it would make a big difference.
And how do you see this changing? Because the situation for workers is very dangerous. The attack on labor is growing. Despite a Democratic administration, workers are still under attack, even in California. The janitors and healthcare workers and many workers are under attack. How is this going to change, and what's going to make the breakthrough for working people in this country?
Well, I think the way it's going to change is that I think the Amazon vote, the one silver lining is I think it led to a lot of questions of the way unions are set up and the way unions ran this election. And I think it led to a lot of deep questions. And we have to keep exploring those questions. I mean, this is a loss. It's a loss that's painful, but out of pain comes growth, right? And how much is the labor movement willing to do, I think, in this period to ask itself deep questions? And how much are we willing to do as, independent labor journalists to push those questions?
And you've been a labor journalist. You've been an independent journalist and not afraid of taking on not only corruption with the bosses, but corruption in the unions. The CWA, I'm a member as well, has a membership of over 700,000. They represent TV workers, NABIT, they represent journalists, thousands of journalists. Yet the CWA itself doesn't even have a channel, and there is no national labor channel. How could the labor movement, the unions, really build a real media platform that would cover labor and educate workers about labor history and the labor struggles going on in this country?
Well, the good thing is there's plenty of union members, just not in the communications workers, but in other unions that are already doing labor media. It's just they don't have much support. And we can't necessarily expect the bosses of these big unions to give us the support. We have to start building it and doing it ourselves. And that's what we've been doing at Payday Report. We'll crowdfund it. We bring in about $100,000 a year off of our readers. And so I think, building this up and building out an ecosystem to support this kind of organizing is essential.
And what is the responses has been to your articles about the reasons for the loss at Amazon?
Well, we predicted it before the vote, and we were called on the payroll of Bezos and all these other people, right?
You're an enemy of labor because you said that you didn't think they were going to win the election.
Yeah. There's this term I've been thinking about. There's this thing that's emerged called union bureaucrat Twitter. And it's all these young union staffers. And, if you're a journalist who will toe the union line, they'll make your articles go viral. If you don't, they'll come after you. And as someone who's taken on sexual misconduct and corruption in this union, I've been on the other end. But it was quite remarkable to hear all these people say, oh, no, they're going to win. And then they lose 70-30. That's just classic union bureaucrat Twitter right there. I think, there's a real culture in some of these unions. When you have top-down unions, it's just not that they're bad unions, they become like cults. They become, I heard somebody bring it up once. Mary McMillan in an interview, she's the president of the Mary B. McMillan's the president of the North Carolina AFL-CIO, and we were in an interview with her for Frank News, and she said too many unions become like fan clubs for the labor leader. And that's true. They become who's going to come hear the same boring speech over and over again that we've all heard a million times. And, you know, and that winds up almost becoming cults in a lot of times. And if you start criticizing the cult leader, you're all of a sudden, you know, they come after you. And I think that's the really unfortunate part. And it's really unfortunate given, I think, the influx over the last several decades of college-educated organizers who come from affluent backgrounds, who discover Marx in college and they throw off the yoke of their parents and they become hardcore ideologues or whatever they are. I don't even know if they're ideologues. They believe in union bureaucracy and they believe in their part in it, and they're middle-class managers of the labor movement. They're technocrats. And they really hurt the labor movement in many ways. And I think we have to really, you know, this push where they thought, oh yeah, you know, we're all of a sudden going to just go, you know, we're just going to drive this in there. They should have stepped back and said, you know what we need? We need to do 2 or 3 years of organizing in the community, build something, try to bring it for a vote. Because everyone knows workforces like that are high turnover, you can't always necessarily organize a union, but you can always have worker centers. You can always have worker-oriented movements in those places without a union. And I think COVID, where we saw over 1,200 wildcat strikes, raises a lot of questions of how we could be doing this better.
And I think it's shown to workers that they're disposable, they're expendable. And I know that on the docks in Los Angeles, 700 dock workers have gotten COVID, 12 have died. And I heard that in China, they've got no problem with health problems on the docks because they force the companies, the employers to take care of the dock workers. So why they can do it in China and we can't do it in this country, that raises the question, where's the priority for workers in this country?
Exactly. And I think labor is failing to step up to the moment of the crisis right now. And if a quick union election is our response to the crisis as a movement, that's a bad response.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us and talking about your experiences at Amazon and also your work to cover other important labor struggles and labor organizing campaigns. We've been talking with Mike Elk, Payday, an independent journalist, and he's been talking about this struggle and lessons from Amazon. So thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.